The candles in the ballroom shook as the doors slammed open, and every head turned toward the tall man walking in with fury in his eyes. Evelyn Hart froze near the marble staircase, her heart pounding, because she knew exactly why he had come. Julian Ashworth, the Duke of Ravenswood, was searching for her, and he was not smiling. Only 3 days earlier, Evelyn had been a simple companion to Lady Margaret, a woman known for her sharp tongue and sharper debts. Evelyn had no title, no fortune, and no reason to be standing in a ballroom filled with lords and ladies who whispered behind painted fans. But fate had a strange way of pulling ordinary people into extraordinary trouble. It had started with a letter. Lady Margaret owed money to a man named Reginald Voss, a cruel cousin of the Duke who wanted control of the Ravenswood estate. Reginald had threatened to expose old family secrets unless Margaret helped him trap Julian into a marriage he did not want, one that would hand Reginald influence over the family fortune. Desperate, Margaret had begged Evelyn to pretend, just for a short while, to be engaged to the Duke, so that Reginald's plan would fail and the family name would stay protected. Evelyn had refused at first. The idea was foolish, dangerous, and far beyond her simple life. But Margaret had nowhere else to turn, and Evelyn owed her more than she could ever repay. So when Julian Ashworth arrived at Margaret's home 2 days ago, cold and unreadable, Evelyn had agreed to the plan, not knowing it would change everything. Now, standing in the crowded ballroom, she realized just how quickly a lie could spin out of control. Julian crossed the floor toward her, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for danger. When he reached her side, he leaned down and spoke low enough that only she could hear. "Reginald is here," he said. "He brought witnesses. If he sees even a flicker of doubt on your face, everything we built will fall apart." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I did not expect him tonight." "Neither did I," Julian said, "but we have no choice now. Smile. Look at me as though you adore me." She forced her lips into a soft curve, though her hands trembled at her sides. Across the room, Reginald Voss watched them with narrowed eyes, a glass of wine held loosely in his hand, his smile as thin as a blade. Beside him stood 2 older gentlemen, men known for spreading gossip through every parlor in the city. If they caught even a hint that the engagement was false, Julian's reputation and Evelyn's safety would be destroyed within a day. "Come," Julian said, offering his arm. "We must dance." Evelyn placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the tension in his muscles beneath the fine fabric. As they moved into position for the next dance, the orchestra began a slow, elegant waltz, and the crowd parted to watch the Duke and his mysterious new fiancée. Julian's hand rested at her waist, firm but careful, and his other hand held hers with a steadiness that surprised her. She had expected him to be as cold in private as he appeared in public, yet there was something else beneath his sharp expression, something guarded and tired, like a man who had spent years defending himself from people who only wanted what he owned. "You dance well for a companion," he said quietly as they turned. "You dance well for a man who looks like he would rather be anywhere else," Evelyn replied. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, followed by the faintest trace of amusement. "Careful, Miss Hart. If you keep speaking to me like that, people might believe we are truly fond of each other." "Is that not the point?" she asked. "It is," he said, "but most people find me difficult to be fond of." She studied him for a moment, noting the shadows beneath his eyes, the tightness around his mouth. Whatever burdens he carried, they were heavier than a simple family dispute. But before she could ask anything more, the music slowed and Reginald Voss stepped closer to the dance floor, watching them with open suspicion. "Smile," Julian whispered again. "He is close enough to hear now." Evelyn tilted her head up toward him, doing her best to appear like a woman deeply attached to the man before her. Julian's gaze softened, just slightly, as though he were memorizing her face for a performance only they understood. When the dance ended, he did not step back immediately. Instead, he kept her hand in his, turning slightly so that Reginald could see them clearly. "My dear," Julian said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "you look more beautiful tonight than any woman in this room." Evelyn's cheeks warmed, though she reminded herself it was only an act. "You flatter me, your grace." "I speak the truth," he said, and for a moment his voice did not sound like performance at all. Reginald approached them slowly, his smile widening in a way that made Evelyn's stomach twist. "Cousin," he said, addressing Julian while his eyes stayed fixed on Evelyn. "I had heard rumors of your sudden engagement, but I did not believe them until now. Tell me, Miss Hart, how long have you known the Duke?" "Long enough," Evelyn said carefully, "to know he is a man of great patience." Reginald's smile did not reach his eyes. "How curious. I have known Julian his entire life, and patience was never a word I would use to describe him." "People change," Julian said, his tone even, though Evelyn could feel the tension in the arm still resting near her waist. "Do they?" Reginald asked. "Or do they simply hide what they truly are until the moment it becomes useful to reveal it?" The air between the two men grew heavy, and Evelyn understood in that instant that this was not a simple family disagreement. There was real danger here, buried beneath polished manners and careful words. Reginald wanted something from Julian, something far more valuable than gossip, and he would not stop until he found a way to take it. "If you will excuse us," Julian said finally, "Miss Hart promised the next dance to no one but me." He guided her away before Reginald could respond, moving swiftly through the crowd toward a quieter corner near the tall windows overlooking the garden. Evelyn's heart still raced from the exchange, and she glanced up at Julian, searching his face for answers. "He suspects something," she said. "He always suspects something," Julian replied. "That is how he survives in this world, by assuming everyone is lying to him. Unfortunately, in our case, he is not entirely wrong." "What does he want from you truly?" Evelyn asked. "It cannot only be the estate." Julian's expression darkened, and for a moment she thought he would refuse to answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. "My father left behind certain documents before he died, papers that prove Reginald's branch of the family attempted to steal funds from the estate years ago. If those documents become public, Reginald will lose everything: his title, his standing, his freedom. He wants to control me, or better yet, control my marriage, so that he can search my home without suspicion and destroy the evidence before anyone finds it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "And if he cannot control you through marriage?" "Then he will try another way," Julian said quietly. "That is why this engagement matters so much. It must appear real enough that he stops looking for other paths into my life. If he believes I am already spoken for by someone loyal only to me, he may hesitate before making his next move." Evelyn absorbed this new information slowly, understanding now the true weight of what she had agreed to. This was not simply about protecting Lady Margaret's reputation. It was about protecting a family, an inheritance, and possibly people who could be hurt if Reginald succeeded in his plans. "Why did you choose me?" she asked. Surely there were other women, women of proper standing, who could have played this role better than I. Julian looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because you have no connection to my world. No one will suspect a quiet companion of scheming for a title. And because Margaret trusted you enough to bring you into this, which means you must be someone of genuine character. I needed someone I could trust, even if only a little, and strangely enough, I trust you more than most people I have known for years." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She had expected calculation, coldness, distance. Instead, she saw a man who was tired of being surrounded by people who only valued what he could give them. Before she could respond, a voice called out from across the garden doors. "Your Grace, might I borrow you for a moment? Lord Whitfield wishes to discuss the matter of the northern trade routes." Julian's shoulders tensed. "Of course," he said, though his eyes lingered on Evelyn a moment longer than necessary. "Wait for me here. I will return shortly." As he walked away, Evelyn turned toward the garden, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The night air drifted through the open doors, cool and calming against her flushed skin. She stepped outside onto the stone terrace, needing a moment away from the noise and watchful eyes of the ballroom. The garden stretched before her in the moonlight. rows of trimmed hedges and blooming flowers casting soft shadows across the path. She walked a few steps further, grateful for the silence, until she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Julian, but instead found Reginald Voss standing only a few feet away, his expression far less friendly than before. "Miss Hart," he said smoothly, "alone at last." Evelyn straightened her shoulders, refusing to let fear show on her face. "Lord Voss, I did not realize you followed me." "I wanted a private word," he said, stepping closer, away from my dear cousin's watchful eyes. "I have nothing to discuss with you," Evelyn said. "On the contrary," Reginald replied, his voice low and cold, "I think you have a great deal to discuss with me. You see, I do not believe for one moment that Julian Ashworth is truly engaged to a companion with no name, no fortune, and no family connections. I believe this entire arrangement is a performance, staged to keep me from doing what I must do." Evelyn kept her expression steady, though her pulse quickened. "You are mistaken." "Am I?" Reginald asked, tilting his head. "Then prove it. Kiss him right now in front of me without hesitation, and perhaps I will believe your affection is genuine." Before Evelyn could respond, another voice cut through the tense silence. "That will not be necessary," Julian said, stepping onto the terrace with quiet authority. Reginald turned, his smile returning though it did not reach his eyes. "Ah, cousin, perfect timing. I was simply testing the strength of your engagement." "Test satisfied," Julian said coldly. "Now leave us." Reginald hesitated, glancing between them, before finally bowing slightly and walking back toward the ballroom, though his gaze lingered on Evelyn one final time before he disappeared through the doors. Once he was gone, Evelyn released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "He does not believe us." "No," Julian said, moving closer. "He does not, and he will not stop testing us until he finds a crack in the story." "What do we do now?" Evelyn asked. Julian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "We give him no reason to doubt again." Before she could ask what he meant, he stepped closer, his hand rising gently to cup her cheek. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat as she realized what he intended. "Trust me," he whispered. And then, without waiting for her answer, Julian Ashworth leaned down and kissed her, softly at first, then deeper, as though trying to convince not only Reginald, who was surely still watching from the shadows, but himself as well, that this fragile, dangerous lie might somehow be worth protecting. When they finally parted, Evelyn stood breathless, her heart pounding louder than the music still drifting from the ballroom. Julian's eyes searched hers, uncertain, as though even he did not fully understand what had just happened between them. "Julian," she whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "I felt it too." Neither of them moved for a long moment, standing together beneath the moonlight, caught between duty and something far more dangerous than any lie they had told that night. Somewhere beyond the garden walls, Reginald Voss watched from a shadowed window, his suspicion deepening into something far more calculated. He had seen the kiss, and instead of convincing him the engagement was real, it only made him more determined to uncover the truth hidden beneath it. The night had begun as a simple performance, a desperate attempt to protect a family secret. But as Evelyn stood there, still feeling the warmth of Julian's touch lingering on her skin, she understood that nothing about this arrangement would remain simple for much longer. Somewhere between the lie and the truth, something real had begun to grow, and there was no telling yet whether it would save them or destroy everything they were trying to protect. Morning light spilled across the breakfast room at Ravenswood House, but Evelyn barely tasted the tea in front of her. She kept replaying the kiss from the night before, the way Julian's hand had felt against her cheek, the way his voice had trembled slightly when he whispered that he had felt it too. She told herself it meant nothing, that it had only been for Reginald's benefit, yet her heart refused to believe the excuse. Julian entered the room a few minutes later, dressed simply, his expression guarded once again, as though the man from the garden had vanished with the night. He nodded toward her and took his seat across the table, and for a moment neither of them spoke. You slept well? He finally asked. Not particularly, Evelyn admitted. Nor did I, he said, glancing at the letter resting beside his plate. Reginald sent word this morning. He has invited us to a private dinner at his estate 3 days from now to celebrate our engagement properly. Evelyn's stomach tightened. He does not celebrate anything without a purpose. No, Julian agreed. He wants to study us up close in a setting where we cannot easily escape his questions. If we refuse, he will assume we have something to hide. If we accept, we walk directly into his territory. Then we accept, Evelyn said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. We cannot let him believe we are afraid. Julian studied her carefully, something like respect flickering behind his eyes. You are braver than most women I have met, Miss Hart. I have very little to lose, she replied. That tends to make a person brave or foolish. I have not yet decided which applies to me. A faint smile touched his lips, the first genuine one she had seen from him. Perhaps both. Over the following days, Evelyn found herself spending far more time in Julian's company than she had expected. Since the engagement needed to appear convincing before the dinner at Reginald's estate, Julian insisted they learn small details about each other, things a truly devoted couple would know without thinking. They walked together through the gardens each afternoon, and slowly the careful distance between them began to soften. Julian told her about his childhood, about a father who had been kind but distant, buried in duty long before illness took him. He spoke of his mother, who had passed when he was young, leaving him with only fragments of memory, the sound of her laughter, the scent of lavender in her private study. Evelyn shared pieces of her own life in return, of a family who had once been comfortable before a series of misfortunes left her with nothing but her own resourcefulness. She spoke of Lady Margaret's kindness, of the quiet satisfaction she found in small things, a well-written letter, a garden in bloom, a moment of peace after a difficult day. You speak of peace as though it is a rare thing, Julian observed one afternoon, as they sat beneath a large oak tree near the edge of the property. For someone in my position, it often is, Evelyn said. There is always another task, another expectation, another person to please. Peace is not something I am given. It is something I have learned to find in small corners of an otherwise demanding life. Julian was quiet for a moment, watching her with an expression she could not quite name. I envy that, he finally said. I have title, land, wealth beyond most men's imagination, and yet peace has always felt further from my reach than it does from yours. Perhaps peace is not about what a person has, Evelyn said gently. Perhaps it is about what a person allows themselves to feel, even briefly, without guarding against it. Julian looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that neither dared name aloud. The wind stirred the leaves above them, and for a long moment the world outside their quiet corner of the garden seemed to disappear entirely. It was Julian who finally broke the silence, clearing his throat and standing abruptly. We should return. There is much still to prepare before the dinner at Reginald's estate. Evelyn nodded, though a small part of her wished the moment had lasted longer. That evening, as the household prepared for the days ahead, Julian called Evelyn into his study to review the details Reginald would surely test them on. A large desk stood near the window, covered in papers, and a fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting warm light across the room. He will ask how we met, Julian said, pacing slowly. He will ask about our first impressions of each other, about small, specific memories that only a real couple would share. If our answers do not match, or if they sound rehearsed, he will know immediately. Then we must agree on a story that feels true, Evelyn said, even if it is not. Julian stopped pacing and looked at her. Perhaps it does not need to be entirely false. Evelyn tilted her head. What do you mean? We could use real moments, he said slowly. Moments from these past few days, and simply frame them as though they happened earlier. The walk through the garden, the conversation beneath the oak tree. These memories are already true. We would only need to adjust when they occurred. Evelyn considered this, surprised by how much sense it made, and also by how strange it felt to think of their recent days together as something worth remembering fondly enough to use as proof of affection. "Very well," she said. "Then let us practice." For the next hour, they rehearsed their story carefully, refining small details, laughing occasionally at moments of miscommunication, until the fabricated timeline felt almost as real as the truth itself. By the time the fire had burned low, Evelyn realized she had not thought once about the danger awaiting them at Reginald's estate. She had simply enjoyed being near Julian, learning the quiet rhythms of his mind, discovering a man far different from the cold Duke first introduced to society. 3 days later, their carriage rolled up the long drive toward Voss Manor, an estate as grand and cold as its owner. Reginald greeted them at the entrance with practiced warmth, though his eyes carried the same calculating sharpness Evelyn remembered from the garden. "Cousin," Reginald said, extending a hand toward Julian, and Miss Hart radiant as ever, "please come inside, dinner awaits." The evening unfolded with careful precision, every course accompanied by pointed questions disguised as polite conversation. Reginald asked about their courtship, about small details of their supposed history together, and each time Evelyn and Julian answered smoothly, drawing from the memories they had rehearsed, allowing genuine warmth to color their voices. "Tell me," Reginald said near the end of the meal, swirling wine in his glass, "what was it that first drew you to my cousin, Miss Hart? He is not known for his charm." Evelyn smiled softly, glancing toward Julian. "He listens," she said simply. "Truly listens in a way most people in society do not bother to. It is a rare quality, and once I noticed it, I found it difficult to ignore." Julian's eyes met hers, and for a moment the answer felt less like performance and more like confession. Reginald watched them both closely, his expression unreadable, before finally setting down his glass. "How touching," he said, though his tone carried no warmth. "I confess I remain curious about one detail. Julian, you have always been a private man, guarded even with family. Yet here you sit, sharing tender glances with a companion you claim to have known only a short while. Forgive me if I find the transformation somewhat sudden." "People change," Julian said evenly, echoing the words he had used at the ballroom. "So you have said before," Reginald replied. "Yet I wonder if perhaps the change is not in your heart but in your strategy." The room grew tense, the other guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, sensing the danger building beneath Reginald's calm exterior. "I do not understand your meaning," Julian said carefully. Reginald leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough that only those closest could hear. "I mean, cousin, that I intend to visit Ravenswood House myself, quite soon, to see this remarkable love story unfold within its natural setting. Perhaps witnessing you both in your everyday life will finally settle my doubts." Evelyn's heart sank. A visit to their home would mean far greater scrutiny, far more opportunities for their fabricated history to unravel under close observation. Julian's jaw tightened, though he maintained his composed expression. "You are always welcome," Julian said, though his voice carried a warning beneath its polite tone. "Though I suggest you remember whose home you will be entering." Reginald smiled thinly. "I would not dream of forgetting." The remainder of the dinner passed with careful tension, both sides aware that the true battle had only just begun. As their carriage finally departed Voss Manor later that night, Evelyn released a long breath, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "He suspects everything," she said quietly. "Yes," Julian replied, staring out the window into the darkness. "And now he intends to test us on our own ground, where he believes we will be too comfortable to maintain the performance." "What will we do?" Evelyn asked. Julian turned to look at her, his expression softer than she expected. "We will not need to perform, Evelyn. Not entirely. What he witnessed tonight when you spoke of listening, when I could not look away from you across that table, that was not something either of us invented for his benefit." Evelyn's breath caught. "Julian." "I know it complicates things," he said quickly, as though afraid to let the moment linger too long. I know this began as nothing more than a necessary lie, but I find myself no longer certain where the lie ends and something else begins. Evelyn reached across the carriage and gently took his hand, feeling the warmth of his fingers close around hers. Neither spoke again for the remainder of the journey home, but the silence between them felt different now, heavier with unspoken understanding, lighter with quiet hope. When they arrived back at Ravenswood House, Julian walked Evelyn to her chamber door, lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Whatever happens with Reginald," he said quietly, "I want you to know that these past days have given me something I had long forgotten how to feel." "What is that?" Evelyn asked softly. "Comfort," Julian said. "Simply being near you brings a kind of peace I did not believe I was capable of finding." Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion she had not expected to feel so soon, so completely, for a man she had agreed to deceive society alongside only days earlier. "I feel it too," she admitted. Julian reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "I should let you rest," he said, though he made no move to step away. "Julian," she whispered. Before either of them could decide what came next, a servant's footsteps echoed down the hallway, and the moment dissolved as quickly as it had formed. Julian stepped back, clearing his throat, restoring the careful distance expected between them in front of watching eyes. "Good night, Evelyn," he said softly, before turning and walking toward his own chambers. Evelyn stood alone in the hallway for a long moment, her heart racing, her mind spinning with questions she had no answers to. What had begun as a desperate lie to protect a family secret had somehow grown into something far more complicated, far more real, and far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. And with Reginald now determined to visit their home, testing every corner of their fabricated life together, Evelyn understood that the next challenge awaiting them would require more than rehearsed answers and careful performances. It would require trust, honesty, and a willingness to risk everything for a connection neither of them had expected to find. The following morning arrived with gray skies and a heaviness that matched the uncertainty settling over Ravenswood House. Julian had barely finished his coffee when a messenger arrived, delivering a letter sealed with Reginald's crest. Julian read it silently, his expression darkening with each line. "What does it say?" Evelyn asked, watching him carefully. "He intends to arrive tomorrow," Julian said. "Not for a formal visit but unannounced, claiming he wishes to see our life together in its natural state, without preparation or performance." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Tomorrow gives us no time to prepare further." "That is precisely his intention," Julian said, setting the letter down with controlled frustration. "He wants to catch us unprepared, hoping the truth will slip through the cracks before we have a chance to reinforce them." Evelyn thought quickly, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "Then we must ensure there are no cracks left to find. We continue exactly as we have been these past days, walking together, speaking honestly, allowing whatever exists between us to remain visible. If Reginald arrives expecting performance, let him find something far more difficult to dismiss than acting. Let him find sincerity instead." Julian studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his tired eyes. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Hart." "I intend to keep surprising you," she replied, a small smile touching her lips despite the tension surrounding them. That evening, as the household prepared quietly for Reginald's unexpected arrival, Julian found Evelyn in the library, seated near the fire with a book resting unopened in her lap, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "You are worried," he said, taking the seat across from her. "Are you not?" she asked. "Constantly," he admitted. "But worry has never solved anything in my experience. It only steals peace from moments that deserve to be enjoyed while they last." Evelyn closed her book gently. "Then let us not waste tonight worrying about tomorrow." Julian smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his usually serious face into something younger, softer, more open than she had seen before. "What would you suggest instead?" "Tell me something true," Evelyn said. Not for Reginald's benefit, not for anyone watching, something only I will know. Julian considered this for a long moment, staring into the fire as though searching for the right words. My father once told me that a man's title means nothing if he cannot find someone willing to stand beside him without expecting anything in return. I did not understand what he meant until recently. And now, Evelyn asked softly. Now, Julian said, meeting her eyes directly, I believe I finally understand. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared to name completely, yet both understood clearly. Whatever awaited them with Reginald's arrival the following day, whatever dangers still lingered around the fragile lie they had built together, something real had taken root between them, something neither the threat of exposure nor the weight of family secrets could easily destroy. Reginald arrived the next afternoon precisely as promised, unannounced and watchful, prepared to search every corner of their carefully constructed world for the smallest sign of deception. But what he found, much to his growing frustration, was not a rehearsed performance crumbling under pressure, but two people whose quiet, unguarded moments together seemed increasingly, undeniably real. And as Reginald's suspicion deepened into something far more dangerous than mere doubt, Evelyn and Julian remained unaware that his next move would not simply test their story, but threaten to destroy everything they had both, slowly and unexpectedly, begun to build. Reginald walked through Ravenswood House with the slow, deliberate steps of a man searching for weakness. He examined the portraits lining the hallway, questioned the servants about daily routines, and studied Evelyn and Julian with an intensity that made even the most confident performer nervous. Yet hour after hour, he found nothing to contradict the story they had built, only quiet glances, easy laughter, and small gestures of affection that seemed impossible to fabricate convincingly. By evening, frustration had begun to show beneath Reginald's composed exterior. He joined them for dinner, watching closely as Julian reached across the table to refill Evelyn's glass without being asked, as Evelyn laughed softly at something Julian whispered near her ear, as their hands brushed together in a way that seemed entirely unconscious, entirely natural. You are remarkably comfortable together, Reginald finally said, setting down his fork, for a couple whose engagement began under such unusual circumstances. Love does not require time to grow comfortable, Julian replied evenly. Only honesty. Reginald's eyes narrowed slightly. An interesting choice of words, cousin, considering the circumstances surrounding your engagement. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, sensing the conversation shifting into dangerous territory. Lord Voss, she said calmly, I understand your caution given the complicated history within your family. But I assure you, nothing about my feelings for Julian requires explanation beyond what you have already witnessed. Reginald studied her carefully, searching for any flicker of hesitation, any sign of rehearsed performance. Finding none, he finally leaned back in his chair, though his expression remained unconvinced. Very well, he said. Perhaps I have misjudged the situation. Though I confess, I intend to remain watchful. Family fortunes have been lost before due to hasty decisions made in the name of affection. Then watch closely, Julian said, his voice carrying quiet confidence. You will find nothing here worth your suspicion. The dinner concluded with careful civility, though tension lingered beneath every polite exchange. As Reginald finally departed late that evening, promising further visits in the coming weeks, Evelyn released a long breath, exhaustion settling heavily over her shoulders. He is not finished, she said quietly, watching Reginald's carriage disappear down the long drive. No, Julian agreed. He rarely gives up so easily, but tonight at least we have bought ourselves time. Evelyn turned to look at him, studying the tired lines around his eyes, the quiet strength he carried despite the mounting pressure surrounding them both. Julian, she said softly, how long can we continue like this, balancing between truth and performance, never certain which moments belong to which? Julian reached for her hand, holding it gently between his own. I no longer wish to separate them, he admitted. Whatever began as necessity has become something I am no longer willing to treat as pretense. Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion she had tried carefully to guard against, fearing the complications such feelings would surely bring. "Neither am I," she whispered. For a long moment, they stood together in the quiet entrance hall, the weight of Reginald's suspicion pressing against them from outside, while something warmer, steadier, and increasingly undeniable grew stronger between them within. Yet even as hope began to bloom quietly in the space between necessity and desire, neither Evelyn nor Julian could have predicted how quickly Reginald's next move would threaten to unravel everything they had so carefully built, nor how deeply the coming betrayal would test the fragile trust now forming at the center of their unlikely story. 2 weeks passed with deceptive calm settling over Ravenswood House. Reginald made no further unannounced visits, though letters arrived occasionally, polite on the surface, yet laced with subtle threats that Julian read carefully before burning in the study fireplace. Evelyn watched him grow increasingly protective during this time, insisting she avoid traveling alone, arranging for trusted servants to accompany her whenever she left the estate grounds. "You are worried he will target me directly," Evelyn observed one afternoon, as they walked together through the garden that had become their favorite refuge from the tension surrounding them. "He has done worse to people who stood between him and what he wanted," Julian admitted reluctantly. "I will not allow you to become another casualty of his ambition." Evelyn appreciated his concern, though a part of her worried about the growing danger surrounding their arrangement. "Perhaps it would be safer for me to withdraw from this entirely," she suggested carefully. "Return to Lady Margaret's household, allow you to find another solution to Reginald's threats." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her with an intensity that startled her. "Is that truly what you want?" Evelyn hesitated, searching his eyes for any sign of what he hoped she would say. "No," she admitted softly, "it is not what I want at all." "Then stay," Julian said, closing the distance between them. "Not because Margaret needs this arrangement, not because Reginald threatens our family's secrets, but because I am asking you to stay, for reasons that have nothing to do with performance or protection." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Julian, what are you saying?" "I am saying," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability behind his words, "that somewhere between the lies we told to protect ourselves, I found something real enough to fight for. I am saying that I care for you, Evelyn, deeply, genuinely, in ways I never expected to feel again." Tears gathered unexpectedly in Evelyn's eyes as she absorbed the weight of his confession. "I care for you too," she whispered, "more than I ever intended to allow myself." Julian reached up, gently cupping her face in his hands, his thumb brushing softly against her cheek. "Then let us stop pretending, at least between the two of us. Whatever we tell Reginald, whatever performance we maintain for society, let this between us be real." Evelyn nodded, unable to speak past the emotion swelling in her chest. Julian leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away if she wished, but she remained still, closing the final distance between them herself. Their kiss this time carried none of the desperate performance from the ballroom garden weeks earlier. It was slow, tender, and entirely genuine, a quiet confirmation of feelings neither had expected to discover within a lie designed only to protect a family secret. When they finally parted, Julian rested his forehead gently against hers, both of them breathing unsteadily. "We should discuss what this means," he said softly, "for both of us and for whatever comes next." "Yes," Evelyn agreed, "but not tonight. Tonight, I simply want to enjoy knowing that what exists between us is real." Julian smiled, pulling her gently into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long, uncertain journey. For the first time since this fragile arrangement began, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that perhaps, despite every danger still surrounding them, something good and lasting might grow from the lie that had first brought them together. Their peace, however, proved short-lived. 3 days later, a letter arrived that shattered the fragile comfort they had begun to build. Julian read it in silence, his face draining of color as his hands began to tremble around the parchment. "What is it?" Evelyn asked, alarmed by the sudden change in his demeanor. "Reginald has found proof," Julian said quietly, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Not proof of our engagement's authenticity, but proof of something far more dangerous. He claims to possess a letter written by Lady Margaret detailing the entire arrangement between us, the debt, the deception, everything." Evelyn's heart dropped. How is that possible? Margaret would never risk such a letter falling into the wrong hands. "I do not know how he obtained it," Julian said, "but if it is genuine, he now holds evidence that could destroy us both. He intends to reveal everything, unless I agree to his demands regarding the estate's northern holdings, the very holdings my father protected specifically to keep out of Reginald's control." Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her, the careful world they had built together suddenly threatened with complete collapse. "What will you do?" Julian's jaw tightened with quiet determination. "I do not yet know, but I will not allow him to destroy everything my father worked to protect, nor will I allow him to harm you in the process. Whatever comes next, Evelyn, I promise you, I will find a way through this." Yet even as he spoke the words with conviction, both of them understood the danger now facing them had grown far beyond simple suspicion or careful performance. Reginald held real power over their fragile arrangement, and unless they discovered a way to counter his threat, everything they had built together, both the lie and the truth hidden within it, stood on the edge of complete destruction. The days following Reginald's threatening letter passed in tense preparation. Julian spent long hours in his study, reviewing old family documents, searching for any evidence that might counter Reginald's claims or expose his cousin's own hidden schemes. Evelyn assisted where she could, though the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily upon them both. "There must be something," Evelyn said one evening, sorting through a stack of old letters Julian's father had kept locked away for years. "Some proof of Reginald's earlier attempts to steal from the estate." Julian rubbed his tired eyes, exhaustion evident in every movement. "I have searched everywhere I know to search. My father was careful, perhaps too careful, hiding evidence so thoroughly that even I cannot locate it now." Evelyn paused, considering their situation carefully. What if the evidence is not hidden within documents at all, but within someone who witnessed Reginald's earlier schemes firsthand? Julian looked up, curiosity replacing exhaustion in his expression. "What are you suggesting?" "Your father's former steward," Evelyn said slowly, recalling a detail Julian had mentioned weeks earlier. "The man who managed the estate's finances before Reginald's scheme was discovered. You mentioned he left service shortly afterward, retiring quietly to the countryside. Perhaps he knows details that were never written down, information Reginald would prefer remain forgotten." Julian's expression sharpened with renewed hope. Old Mr. Fairweather. Yes, he would have witnessed everything firsthand. If anyone possesses knowledge dangerous enough to counter Reginald's threats, it would be him. "Then we must find him," Evelyn said firmly, "before Reginald forces your hand." Julian nodded, already moving toward his desk to arrange for the journey. "It will take several days to reach his cottage in the countryside. We cannot delay." "Then let us leave tomorrow morning," Evelyn said, "together." Julian hesitated. The journey carries risk, especially with Reginald watching so closely. "I am not afraid," Evelyn said firmly. "Not when the alternative means allowing him to destroy everything you have fought so hard to protect." Julian studied her for a long moment, admiration and affection blending clearly in his expression. "Very well, together then." Their journey the following morning proved long and difficult, winding through narrow countryside roads beneath gray autumn skies. Evelyn watched the passing landscape with quiet determination, her thoughts constantly returning to the danger awaiting them upon their return, regardless of what they discovered from Mr. Fairweather. They arrived at a small, modest cottage nestled at the edge of a quiet village late in the afternoon. An elderly man answered the door, his eyes widening with surprise upon recognizing Julian. "Your Grace," Mr. Fairweather said, bowing slightly despite his age, I never expected to see you at my door. Forgive the unannounced visit, Julian said, but I require information only you may possess regarding events from many years ago involving my cousin Reginald. Mr. Fairweather's expression grew serious, understanding immediately the weight behind Julian's request. You had best come inside, he said quietly. This is not a conversation for open doorways. Inside the small cottage, over tea prepared by the elderly man's trembling hands, Mr. Fairweather revealed details Julian had never known, information far more damaging than mere financial theft. He spoke of falsified documents, of threats made against his own family to ensure his silence, of Reginald's careful manipulation extending far beyond simple greed into something darker, more calculated, and far more dangerous than either Julian or Evelyn had anticipated. Why did you never come forward? Julian asked, struggling to comprehend the full scope of what he was hearing. Because your cousin made it clear, Mr. Fairweather said, his voice heavy with old fear, that speaking the truth would cost me more than my position. It would cost the safety of my family. And now, Evelyn asked gently, would you be willing to speak the truth now, knowing what it might mean for both of us? Mr. Fairweather considered this for a long moment, weighing decades of silence against the earnest request before him. For the memory of your father, Your Grace, a man who treated me with more kindness than his nephew ever did, I will provide whatever testimony you require. But you must promise to protect my family from retaliation. You have my word, Julian said firmly. Whatever protection you and your family require, I will provide it without hesitation. As Mr. Fairweather began recounting details in careful, thorough documentation, Evelyn felt a cautious hope building within her chest for the first time since Reginald's threatening letter had arrived. Perhaps, finally, they possessed the means to counter his dangerous scheme, to protect not only Julian's inheritance, but the fragile, genuine love that had grown unexpectedly between them throughout this entire dangerous ordeal. Yet even as hope began to take root, neither Evelyn nor Julian could have anticipated the lengths Reginald would go to once he discovered their journey to seek out Mr. Fairweather's testimony, nor the devastating betrayal still waiting to unfold before their story could reach its true resolution. They returned to Ravenswood House 3 days later, armed with Mr. Fairweather's written testimony and cautious optimism that finally they possessed the means to counter Reginald's threats. But upon their arrival, a tense stillness greeted them, servants avoiding eye contact, the household unusually quiet despite the late afternoon hour. Something is wrong, Julian said, his instincts sharpening immediately as they entered the main hall. A servant approached hesitantly, wringing her hands with visible distress. Your Grace, Lord Voss arrived shortly after your departure. He insisted on searching your study, claiming urgent business required his attention. We could not refuse him without cause. Julian's expression darkened with fury. He searched my private study. Yes, Your Grace. He remained for several hours before departing this morning. Julian moved quickly toward his study, Evelyn following closely behind, dread building steadily within her chest. Upon entering, they found the room in careful disarray, drawers left slightly open, papers rearranged just enough to suggest thorough searching. He was looking for the very evidence we just secured, Evelyn realized, her voice tight with alarm. Julian moved immediately to the hidden compartment where he had stored his father's original documents, releasing a breath of relief upon finding them undisturbed. He did not find what he sought, Julian said, though worry still lined his features. But he now knows we are actively searching for evidence against him. This will only accelerate his plans. As if summoned by their fears, another letter arrived within the hour, delivered by a breathless messenger who insisted it required immediate attention. Julian broke the seal quickly, his eyes scanning the contents with growing alarm. He knows about Mr. Fairweather, Julian said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He demands we abandon our search for evidence, or he will ensure Fairweather's family suffers the consequences he threatened years ago. Evelyn's heart raced with fear, not only for Mr. Fairweather's safety, but for the increasingly dangerous situation surrounding them all. "We must warn him immediately," she said urgently. "Yes," Julian agreed, already moving to arrange for a trusted rider to deliver warning to the countryside cottage. "But this changes everything. Reginald is no longer content with subtle manipulation. He is prepared to threaten innocent lives to protect his secrets." Evelyn watched Julian's controlled fury with growing concern, understanding that their fragile situation had escalated into something far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated when this arrangement first began. "What do we do now?" she asked. Julian turned to face her, determination hardening his expression despite the danger surrounding them. "We finish what we started. We gather every piece of evidence available, and we confront Reginald directly, before he has the opportunity to cause further harm to anyone connected to this family." "And if confronting him puts us both at greater risk?" Evelyn asked carefully. "Then we face that risk together," Julian said firmly, reaching for her hand. "I will not allow fear to dictate our actions any longer, not when so much depends on finally exposing the truth." Evelyn nodded, steadying herself against the uncertainty ahead. Whatever confrontation awaited them, she understood there was no turning back now, not from the danger surrounding Reginald's schemes, and certainly not from the genuine bond that had grown between herself and Julian throughout this entire perilous journey. The following days passed in careful preparation, gathering testimony, securing Mr. Fairweather's safety through trusted protection, and arranging the confrontation that would finally determine the outcome of months of careful deception and dangerous secrets. Julian sent word to Reginald, requesting a formal meeting at Ravenswood House, one final opportunity to settle matters before either party proceeded with more drastic measures. Reginald arrived precisely on schedule, his confident demeanor betraying no hint of concern despite the serious nature of the meeting. He settled into a chair across from Julian's desk, Evelyn standing quietly nearby, watching the exchange with careful attention. "You requested this meeting," Reginald said smoothly. "I assume you have finally come to your senses regarding the Northern Holdings." "I have come to discuss something far more important," Julian replied, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. "I have obtained testimony regarding events from many years ago. Testimony that directly contradicts the story you have maintained regarding the estate's original financial discrepancies." Reginald's expression flickered just briefly before settling back into practiced calm. "I do not know what you mean." "I believe you do," Julian said, sliding Mr. Fairweather's written testimony across the desk. "This document details your involvement in falsifying estate records, threatening witnesses into silence, and manipulating my father's trust for personal gain." Reginald's eyes scanned the document quickly, his composure finally beginning to crack beneath the weight of the evidence before him. "This proves nothing," he said, though his voice carried less confidence than before. "The word of an old, forgotten steward means little against my standing in society." "Perhaps," Julian said calmly. "But combined with the original documents my father secured before his passing, documents I have finally located within this very estate, I believe the evidence becomes considerably more difficult to dismiss." Reginald's face paled slightly as Julian retrieved a second set of papers from a locked drawer, papers containing detailed financial records proving years of careful theft and manipulation. The full weight of the evidence now assembled before him made clear that his schemes, carefully hidden for years, stood on the verge of complete exposure. "What do you want?" Reginald finally asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I want you to withdraw entirely from any claim against this estate," Julian said firmly. "I want you to cease all threats against Lady Margaret, against Mr. Fairweather and his family, and against Evelyn. In exchange, I am prepared to keep this evidence private, allowing you to depart quietly rather than facing public disgrace and legal consequence." Reginald sat in tense silence, weighing his rapidly diminishing options. Finally, recognizing the impossibility of his position, he nodded stiffly. "Very well, You have made your point, cousin. I will trouble you no further." As Reginald departed Ravenswood House for the final time, Evelyn felt the weight of months of danger and uncertainty finally begin to lift from her shoulders. Julian turned to her, exhaustion and relief blending clearly across his features. "It is finally over," he said quietly. "Yes," Evelyn agreed, moving closer to him, "truly over." Julian reached for her hands, holding them gently within his own. "Evelyn, everything that began between us as necessary deception has become the most genuine, important part of my life. I do not wish to continue pretending, not for Reginald, not for society, not for anyone. I wish to build something real openly, without fear or performance standing between us any longer." Evelyn's heart swelled with emotion as she understood the true weight behind his words. "What are you asking, Julian?" Julian lowered himself onto one knee, still holding her hands gently within his own, his eyes filled with sincerity and hope. "I am asking you to marry me, Evelyn, not as part of any arrangement or performance, but because I love you completely and genuinely, in ways I never expected to discover through the lie that first brought us together." Tears gathered in Evelyn's eyes as she absorbed the depth of his proposal. "Yes," she whispered, joy and relief blending together in her voice. "Yes, Julian, I will marry you." Julian rose, pulling her into a warm embrace, relief and happiness finally replacing months of careful tension and danger. As they stood together in the quiet study, the setting sun casting warm light through the windows, both understood that whatever challenges had brought them together, whatever danger had tested their fragile arrangement, something genuine, lasting, and deeply meaningful had grown from the lie that first connected their lives. Their wedding took place several months later, a joyful celebration attended by Lady Margaret, Mr. Fairweather, and countless friends who had witnessed the genuine transformation of their relationship over the preceding months. Reginald, true to his word, remained absent from society, his schemes and ambitions quietly abandoned in exchange for continued freedom from public disgrace. Standing together as husband and wife, Julian and Evelyn understood that their story, which had begun with a desperate lie whispered urgently in a crowded ballroom, had transformed into something far more meaningful than either could have imagined. What started as necessary deception to protect a family secret had become the foundation for a genuine, lasting love, proving that sometimes, even the most complicated beginnings could lead toward the truest, most rewarding endings imaginable. Years later, as Evelyn watched their children play in the same garden where she and Julian had first discovered genuine feelings beneath careful performance, she often thought back to that first desperate kiss in the moonlit terrace, the whispered words that had changed the course of her entire life. What had begun as a lie to protect against scandal had ultimately revealed the deepest truth of all, that genuine love, however unexpectedly it arrives, has the power to transform even the most desperate circumstances into a lifetime of lasting happiness.